Hult Prize Nigeria Podcast.
Hi, innovators, change makers, and global leaders. My name is Simon Olomu, and I'm your host for the Hult Prize Podcast. Here on Hult Prize Podcast, we spotlight innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership. It's a platform for bold ideas, for leading questions, and for stories of resilience and grit. So, watch this space. Today we are joined by Dr. Walter Mswaka, an associate professor of social entrepreneurship at Rollins College, Florida. He holds a PhD in social enterprise from the University of Huddersfield, United Kingdom. His background is in business creation and development, including providing business advisory and technical support to social enterprises and non-profit across several countries nationwide, such as the UK, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Zambia, and Brazil. This includes delivering a variety of externally funded enterprises, such support interventions through promoting cross-sectoral approach to working between private and social enterprises to tackle socioeconomic and environment challenges that our world faces today. Over the past 15 years, he has conducted extensive research on social enterprises across various socio-economic contexts and has published papers in peer-reviewed journals. Dr. Walter, I'm so excited to have you here, and on behalf of the Hult Prize team, welcome you to our podcast.
So, yes, thank you so much, Samuel, for having me.
So we just get right into it. You spent over 15 years working across continents. So what first drew your interest to social entrepreneurship, and how has the journey evolved over time?
Actually, my interest in social entrepreneurship started when I was an undergraduate student. That's when I first started my own social enterprise. And what drew me to social entrepreneurship was just the idea of helping while also sustaining my livelihood from whatever I'm doing, right? Which are the hallmarks of a social enterprise. So it's about really a business that is dedicated in perpetuity to addressing socioeconomic and environmental concerns through enterprise. So I then decided to do an MPhil in social entrepreneurship. And then I worked for several years as a social enterprise business advisor in different countries. And because of that passion of helping people, and also of the passion of seeing how social entrepreneurship itself can act as a glue in communities, helping communities harness social capital, harness their social natural resources so that they can sustain their livelihoods through business, because a social enterprise is not a charitable organization. Right? And that's also saw me developing further interest in social entrepreneurship, particularly the legal frameworks, because social enterprises need some kind of an infrastructure to maximize extraction and deliverance of value. So I did a PhD in social entrepreneurship legal frameworks, which basically focused on the differing legal frameworks and different ways in which social entrepreneurs select specific legal structures to underpin their activities. Right? And that also saw me working in different countries like Sri Lanka, mapping social entrepreneurship, developing there, and also ascertaining its positionality within the economy, within the public, private, and charitable sectors as well. And in Brazil, we are still working on a project in which we are looking at how social entrepreneurship intervention can reduce reoffending in open prisons, right? So it also shows how social entrepreneurship itself has evolved, not just as a concept, but as a robust partner to public delivery. Right? So in Zambia, I'm working with colleagues as well, trying to help the country come up with a definition for social enterprise. right? And in England, where I did my social enterprise, I worked particularly in South Yorkshire, working with social enterprises there, looking at how they can also maximize, deliverance of value and extraction of value through innovation in business models and legal frameworks. So that has really been my journey in social entrepreneurship. And I would say, just to summarize, it was just this passion that I had of actually helping people sustain their livelihood through enterprise.
All right. Thank you so much for that wonderful perspective shared. And those are really salient points. And from the research I made about you, Dr. Walter, you are a very great voice when it comes to social entrepreneurship. And I read some of your research papers online too, like very outstanding and great. So that being said, you mentioned while you were speaking that you've worked in countries across the world, currently working on a project in Brazil, and also the Zambia and some other countries like Sri Lanka and the United Kingdom. And particularly, Hult Prize is about young innovators, about building social enterprises across the world. But in this context, we are Hult Prize Nigeria, and particularly in Nigeria, young people are building social enterprises across their different campuses. And this year, we are going to be hosting some of them at the Hult Prize National Competition this April and May. And I'm sure you are joining us this particular month.
Yes.
I just want to ask, what are some of the common patterns you see in social enterprises across some of these different demographics that you've actually worked? These different demographics operate on different kind of culture, different kind of how they make things work. So what are the common patterns do you see in all of these demographics?
But the common patterns that I see in all these demographics, that's a very interesting question, is really the common thread is really this ability of being self-aware, right? So for a social entrepreneur, you need to be aware of your surroundings, the environment in which you live. You need actually to take an interest in how people live. You need to take an interest on how the economy is functioning. You need also to take an interest in how you can help as an individual, right? So these are like the common patterns that I have actually observed. And also to add on to that, the other thing that has really been interesting for me as well is how young people in particular are embracing the concept of social entrepreneurship, how they are putting the well-being of the world and the communities in which they live at the core of what they do, not just focusing on profit. So for me, that has been a very interesting phenomenon, cutting across all these demographics that I've worked with, and just this interest that young people have in terms of protecting our Mother Earth through enterprise.
All right, I think that's a great one. First to mention that the ability to be self-aware, particularly amongst young people. And I could actually attest to that fact because from what I understand, we have different kind of businesses. One of them is the business of your problem. Another is the business of your passion and the like. So the business of a problem is, okay, growing up, a particular young boy faced the problem of exclusion based on disability while he was in school, and now he's of age and he wants to solve that kind of problem to help himself and also to help other young people who might be facing similar challenges as him. So it starts from you being self-aware that this is who I am, and this is how I could actually solve this problem from occurring to other persons. I think those are very salient points. So that being said, you're a researcher and also a practitioner. So how do you bridge the gap between academic theory and real-world enterprise building? Sir, I must make you understand that particularly in Africa, I think now Africa is now waking up to the reality of let us build. By 2050, we are going to have the largest population in Africa. We are going to have the largest population in the world. And
yes.
One amongst the 3 persons you are meeting are going to be from Africa. And this speaks more of the fact that we need to actually do a lot of work when it comes to production, consumption, and the likes. Because
Yes.
we are going to control the workforce, massive workforce around the continent. And I believe that if we really want to get this, if you really want to achieve this, we need to build capacity, right? We need to build. We need to build in terms of social enterprise. We need to build in the technology space, and particularly looking at what data is doing now. We don't really have much data. Most of these data are being controlled by foreign companies, and most companies are waking up to the realization now, but I think that we actually need to do more. So if there's anything I know we know in this part of the world is we understand theory like the back of our hands, but translating the theory into implementation and then making it work for us is what is actually more challenging. So how do you think young innovators, particularly under the Hult Prize umbrella, can actually bridge this gap, like can actually move from theory then into practical? Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think that's very, very interesting. And I think the kind of a theology about, what's happening in Africa, and I totally agree with you. But for me, I've got a very interesting perspective on theory and practice. Because as you rightly said, practice is about doing, it's about addressing something, right? And so the way that I look at theory is actually some form of, in inverted commas, reverse technology, right? Because if you need to know what you need to do to address a certain problem. That's number one, self-awareness. And also self-awareness is linked to design thinking. You have to put yourselves in the shoes of your beneficiaries, right? And then you think about what sort of interventions do I need to come up with, right? And then you take a step back, right? What does theory say about this, right? So in other words, the way that I look at things, particularly when I'm working with communities, is to actually say you need, first of all, to understand exactly what you need to do. If there is homelessness in a particular area, what do you think needs to be done to get the homelessness addressed while at the same time you're making money as well, right? Then second, what does theory say about this? So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that how I bridge that gap is theory just helps you to make more sense of what you already know, right? So the most important thing is to really, really understand the interventions. Because if you just concentrate on theory, it's like chasing a pie in the sky, really, because theories are there to provide some kind of a framework, isn't it? And some kind of legitimacy to what you're doing, right? So, but in terms of how I bridge that gap is actually helping students, first of all, get a firm grip of what they need to do. What about design thinking? What are some of the gaps that they want to address? In social entrepreneurship, we talk of institutional gaps, right? We talk of institutional voids, rather, because we know that a government, for example, can address public health issues horizontally, right? We've got the government, then the policy trickles down. But social enterprises and young people work horizontally, rather. So what I meant, sorry about that, I meant actually that public policy is implemented vertically, and then social enterprises operate horizontally, right? So having said that, once young people have got an idea, are self-aware, and they've got an idea of exactly what they want to do, the steps that they want to take, then they can take a step back and actually look at theory and actually say, okay, wow, this is the theory behind what we are doing. But theory just helps them to make more sense of what they are doing, because otherwise they'll get lost if they concentrate on theory. And that's one problem as well that to some extent is affected development in Africa, right? By actually just probably focusing on theory only, because theory basically is somebody else's, idea, isn't it? And perceptions on how we can frame a particular intervention. But the real solutions come from actually doing it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. So thank you so much for that wonderful perspective. And I think from what I was able to get from that is that the addition of theory and real-world practice is actually impact, right? And just combining the theory, academic theories, with meaningful implementation gives us real impact, and particularly for Africa. So yes, on the flip side now, yes, on the flip side now.
Absolutely. And also because the problem that is actually from my own research, I've noticed that, as you rightly said, most of the developing initiatives were actually being driven by external forces, right?
Yeah.
Even though we as Africans probably know exactly what we need to do. But because we say, all right, if we follow exactly what we want to do, maybe we won't get money, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why this is something that really piqued my interest during my research, to actually say, right, what is this gap between theory and practice? And I really realized that theory is just there to help us do things better, increase impact, and most importantly, help us understand what we are doing. But there are so many cases somewhere where I've talked to entrepreneurs, right? And then they've told me, they've articulated very well what they're doing, right? And then when we started talking about theory, right? Then they were saying, oh, I didn't know that was what I was already doing, right? That kind of thing. So that's where I really realized that, right? It's really about helping theory to produce impactful interventions and help people with their self-awareness as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Walter. So on the flip side now, so what unique challenges stand out when building social ventures in developing economics versus more advanced markets? Because the reality in a country like Florida, in a country like the United States, is different from reality in a country like Nigeria.
Absolutely.
Right? And the placing them side by side, the economy in United States is far, far more advanced than what we have here in Nigeria.
Yes.
So what are the unique challenges that you think social enterprises, particularly from students who are building in Nigeria, what do you think they could actually focus on? What challenges do you think they could actually address at this early stage that is going to actually make them like match up with their counterparts in other climes? Yeah.
Okay, I think the first challenge is the institutional space, right, in which social entrepreneurs operate. If you look at the United States, and if you look at Nigeria, if you look at Zimbabwe, if you look at Zambia, right, the institutional space is not very enabling. One, because maybe social enterprises is not a well-known concept. So they may not actually be, funds and technical support available. So that's a big challenge that I've actually seen and experienced through practice and also through research. Institutional space is very, very important. Actually, coincidentally, one of my PhD students actually did his PhD based on Nigerian context, looking at actually institutional theory. And we're able to actually surface some of these issues that I'm talking about. So that's one thing that young people is a big challenge for young people to actually sort of like address, right? Is the institutional space that there's actually are there institutions that can support them? What about the government's view towards social entrepreneurship? Do they see social innovation as a key component to their development policies? And where is the positionality of young people in there? So I see that as a big challenge. And then the other challenge is exposure to other ideas elsewhere. Technology, for example, ways of doing things better, right? So that's actually a huge challenge as well for young and emerging entrepreneurs, right? And the other problem linked to that as well is infrastructure, right? Let's say there's a young innovator. Do they have access to internet where they can go and research? Do they have access where they can actually maybe get in touch with like-minded contemporaries outside Nigeria? It's a big problem. Do they have the money to travel, for example? Right. So these are huge, huge challenges for young entrepreneurs. It's opposed actually to developing economies where they have put a robust infrastructure that helps young people and those interested in social entrepreneurship to get a firm sort of like platform. So I see those as huge challenges, really, for young people to navigate through. But having said that, we are seeing a lot of innovation coming out of Africa, not Nigeria and the other countries, because it shows also the resolve and the resilience that is associated with social entrepreneurship.
Yes, talking about resilience, I could attest to that fact that African youth, particularly in Nigeria, that I'm aware of, we are very, very resilient. And there's this way we just get things done out of nowhere. And that will make me define entrepreneurship or even social entrepreneurship as the act of getting things done, even with fewer resources, right?
Absolutely.
When you're passionate, yes.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And going back to theory again, we all hear of social bricolage, isn't it? That's exactly that. In other words, I have been amazed, Samuel, by young people who have started their social enterprise from nothing. From 10,000 naira, 1,000 naira, starting a social enterprise, right? This also shows how young people can improvise, can make do with what they already have, even in these restrictive socio-economic environments. Totally agree with you.
And I've seen that agree
with my own eyes, because I've been to Nigeria, about 5 times.
Okay. All right. And I also agree with the part where you mentioned infrastructure as one of the challenges, and particularly electricity issue, internet, and you mentioned money to travel. And I think that's a very great one, because there are a lot of young people who, even though they get some opportunities, are unable to fund them because of like the different demography and the currency factor. So I think those are very noticeable challenges. So
absolutely.
Now, so talking about those challenges, and other young people are making things work out even with fewer resources, which of course is very commendable. But I would like to highlight that one of the problems that is actually facing most businesses, social enterprises, or other businesses today is the problem of funding, particularly for social enterprises. So how do you think young founders can actually position better to attract funding from investors?
Absolutely. So that's a very, very interesting question. And I'll just share my own perspective from my own experiences with that, right? Because usually investors like to see, potential for profitability, right? They want to invest in ventures in which they can maximize their returns. More often than not, it's very difficult for them to do so when they are just seeing a young person with nothing, right? So this is where I think, one, the government needs to do more. As you can see, I spoke initially about institutional voids, right? So the government actually needs to do more to see that young people are the future of any nation. And so by supporting and making funding and technical support available, they are able to help them address these institutional voids. That's one way. And then the second one is this partnership with private sector organizations. If you think of go back 3 decades, it was like social enterprise and private sector businesses were like oil and water. They wouldn't mix, right? But now that gap is slowly is reduced, and there's now scope for collaboration between social enterprises and the private sector, right? Where young people can pitch their ideas to private sector organizations, and private sector organizations can, one, invest in there or help them build the business, which becomes part of their ecosystem, right? So that's an emerging phenomenon where young people can also mobilize the financial resources and technical expertise that they have by this collaborative win-win relationship with the private sector.
All right, that's a great one, and particularly the part where you mentioned that young people now have access to pitching their solutions and all of that. So, and on the aspect of the government, on the part of the government, so there's been a lot of interventions. Talking about interventions, the Ministry of Education, because I'm a technology journalist, I report for ITWeb in Johannesburg, South Africa, and recently, the federal government of Nigeria, Ministry of Education, just launched a funding for student startups. And I think some days ago, some students were awarded, some of them were awarded, I think, 50 million naira. I think that's the overall 50 million naira, and others got grants of $5,000 each. So, I think similar examples like that, like the Tony Elumelu Foundation too, that gives out funding for startups and all of that with equity. So I think that's a very great one too. I've asked a question regarding how young founders can actually get investment ready. And so I would just like to know what excites you more about the future of social enterprises, particularly in the African context. You know, people are now looking into going into social enterprises. So what trends do you see like in the next 5 to 10 years that is actually going to make the space more and more exciting?
Absolutely. And I'm very excited about the future of social entrepreneurship in Africa. It's going to grow from strength to strength. And mind you, Samuel, if we look at the concept of social entrepreneurship itself, it has always been there in Africa. It's only that it was not being called social entrepreneurship. But in the next 5 to 10 years, I see social entrepreneurs contributing more to GDP and economic development, contributing more to the creation of employment opportunities. I can see social enterprises being recognized as a contributor, right, as a legitimate contributor to development of the country, right? And one thing that I think maybe that will even excite me more is, like, for example, in England, there used to be a minister of social entrepreneurship. Social entrepreneurship in England actually is bigger than agriculture in terms of GDP. So in Africa, that's what I want to see. But somehow I've got this vision that the technological development or advancement in Africa is going to be driven by social entrepreneurs, young, ambitious people who actually put the welfare of their communities and their country at the core of what they do. And, you know, we talk about this leadership reset. So that's what I say. This leadership reset, where we're going to see young people who are going to be global and responsible leaders as well. So for me, if you ask me, the future is very bright for social entrepreneurship in Africa. And I see that being driven by young people. And I see it being recognized. Some countries already have started recognizing social entrepreneurship as a legitimate and powerful intervention to help address institutional faults.
That's a great one, because Nigeria has over 230 million people, like, as population. And out of that figure, we have over 150 million young persons. That's a very huge number from like the entire population. And this speaks more of the fact that young people are actually the ones who also to drive these things the most. And
absolutely.
Yes. Out of these 150 million young people, I think about 80 million or thereabouts are digital, right? That they are online. So there's still a huge gap of young people that are to be included in the online spaces to see what is happening with technology and all of that. And of course, technology is actually going to drive most of these things, because there has been a lot of skilling programs, a lot of interventions talking about technology. We have the 3 million tech talents by the Federal Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy, Dr. Bosun Tijani, and a lot of others, like from the Technology Commission in Nigeria and all of that. So I think those are very profound points. And that will take me to the last question. Dr. Walter, you'll be serving as a judge at the Hult Prize competition this year. So it is going to be a two-in-one question. First, what do you look forward to in terms of startups? What kind of startups do you look forward to? And what advice are you going to give to these startups during the competition?
Right. Okay. I think for me, I'm also, first of all, I'm very delighted to be one of the judges. I'm very much looking forward to the event. So in terms of the startups, I'm particularly looking at startups that are a bit, inverted commas, out of the ordinary, right? Where people are coming up with innovative ways to address common problems that people see as common, like, unemployment, things like lack of access to certain products. So I want to see how young people are going to think of innovative ways to address the so-called common problems that societies and countries face. So I'm really excited about. And one thing actually that comes to the top of my mind is I'm hoping to see quite a lot of startups that are going to be underpinned by technology. I'm going to look at ways in which technology, even basic technology, is going to be infused into particular interventions to address the socio-economic and environmental problems that we face today. Then second, I'm particularly also looking at how the young people are going to link their project ideas to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Right? In other words, because social entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurship by definition is configured to address the issues that are embodied in the United Nations Development Goals. So I'm actually going to be interested in seeing how they are going to address, not all of them, particular aspects of the UN Sustainable Goals. Because for me, then also that will also demonstrate or provide evidence of their awareness. Remember, we spoke about awareness at the beginning of this session. So that's what I'm looking forward. And then going back to your second question, what advice am I going to give? So first of all is follow your dream, follow your passion, right? So that's number one for any entrepreneur, right? There are so many entrepreneurs that have started businesses which a lot of people have laughed at. They've laughed at the concept to say this will never take off, right? So follow your dream, right? But most importantly, as a social entrepreneur, there's the second advice, is to say that your enterprise is there to address social, economic, and environmental problems, right? We don't want to see elements of mission drift, right? So follow that sort of like that path to actually say, this is what I'm going to do to address particular socioeconomic problems through enterprise. And then third advice is to say, if you're a social entrepreneur, you can also be a millionaire. Because a lot of young people don't know that. They think that for you to be a millionaire, you've got to be like somebody who is running a high-tech manufacturing company like Tesla and whatever it is. No, you can still make money by doing good. I think you are mute.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for that wonderful perspective. I think for us at Hult Prize Nigeria, we've always emphasized on any startups aligning with the United Nations Development Goals, because that is very, very much particular to the Hult Prize because Hult Prize is social entrepreneurship competition. And I think that is actually the core of what we do here. And also, you mentioned that they should actually take their dreams seriously, and that speaks more about conviction on your first point during the last listing. It speaks more of conviction. I think when young founders understand their why, which of course is their conviction, where they are going is not going to be hard. Because one thing I've understood, and the advice I used to give to founders and friends around me, I used to tell them that you need to be convinced of why you want to do certain things. That is everything. Because when you are convinced, whenever people are telling you this cannot work, you know that it will definitely work.
Yeah.
From a personal standpoint, I started writing when I was in secondary school. A particular day, I stumbled on the page of a newspaper, and I was like, I was going to write for newspapers, and then I started. We write every day from Monday to Sunday, and we get no publication. And at
Yeah.
some point, I was getting these
Mm.
publications. I appeared in virtually all the biggest newspapers in Nigeria and internationally. And one day, somebody walked up to me and told me that, don't you see journalists out there? They are not rich people. Like, they don't. And I was not, I was not making money from this. I was only putting my name
Mm.
out there. So, but I didn't listen to whatever they were saying. I was just doing what I was doing. And today I work in the media. I work with an international company, and most of the things I do are around research and also the media space. So conviction is everything for me, and I think I agree with what you said about that. And it is also necessary that you gave that clarification about social entrepreneurs can also be millionaires, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is very, very profound because most people just see, most people, I think they don't really understand the concept of social entrepreneurship. I think they often misunderstand with social impact. And even in social impact, you can be a millionaire. You might not just be a billionaire or a trillionaire, as the case may be, because some people think that there is no money in social impact or even in social impact.
Exactly.
Of course, there is money, but it might not be that billionaire that you want to be. And but of course,
Yes.
there is money in these spaces. But particularly in social entrepreneurship, there is a huge money to be tapped, particularly for the African demographic. So I think those are very salient points, and I must appreciate you on behalf of the Hult Prize team here in Nigeria for
Thank you.
joining us today for the Hult Prize Nigeria's podcast.